We continue now at the top of Daf Yudches Amud Aleph in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 18a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara asked, what if you have a person who declares himself a Nazir in a cemetery and he purifies himself? Is there a halach of shaving in that situation, what we call teglachas tumah? We know there's a halach of teglachas tumah by a regular Nazir who becomes tameh and purifies himself. He has to shave. Again, the question is, what about a Nazir bekever, a person who declared himself a Nazir when he was in a cemetery? And the Gemara on the previous Amud brought a proof from a Brisa, which was discussing the halachas of a Nazir who becomes a Mitzorah. The discussion over there in the Brisa is, are the days when he's a Mitzorah, when the Nazirus is suspended, do those days count towards the days of the Nazirus? And the Brisa brought a proof from shaving, because the Brisa said that we find by a Nazir bekever that there is shaving and the days do not count, and by Mitzorah where there's no shaving, so certainly the days should not count. And the question is, what kind of shaving by the Nazir bekever were we talking about? And at first the Gemara said we're talking about the teglachas tumah, the shaving after you purify yourself from tumah. He declared himself a Nazir in the cemetery, he purifies himself, and he has to shave. The Brisa seems to indicate there is shaving. And then the Gemara said, no, it could be the Brisa was just referring to the general shaving at the end, at the completion of the Nazirus. And the Gemara continues that argument. Because if you think the Brisa is referring to teglachas tumah, so you mechiluto milo boy teglachas, isn't there shaving by a confirmed Mitzorah in general? A Mitzorah, in fact, does shave his hair. So what kind of proof are you bringing? You're saying there's no shaving by Mitzorah, but there is shaving by the Nazir bekever. There is shaving by the Mitzorah. But the Gemara says that's not necessarily a proof. No, because the Brisa could mean as follows. Teglachas de Nazirus katani. We're talking about shaving that's relevant to the Nazirus. Teglachas tumah is a shaving that's relevant to Nazirus. The shaving that a Mitzorah does has nothing to do with the Nazirus, and so it could be that's the argument that the Brisa was making. The Brisa was saying, if in a situation of a Nazir bekever where there is some kind of shaving that's relevant to the Nazirus and the days do not count, so certainly the days do not count by a Mitzorah. Rashi over here explains, isn't there shaving by a confirmed Mitzorah? It says so in the Pasuk. What kind of argument is the Brisa making? It says there's shaving by a Nazir bekever, no shaving by a Mitzorah. There is shaving by a Mitzorah. But the Gemara says, no, it could be the Brisa is making an argument from the teglachas of Tumah. We're talking about a situation where he sprinkled on the third and the seventh day, and he immersed miskalech b'shvishalo, and he does shave on the seventh day. And when the Brisa says that in the days of confirmed Mitzorah there is no shaving of the hair, all the Brisa means is b'teglachas de Nazirus kamar. We just mean to say there's no shaving relevant to Nazirus. The ilu Nazirus bekever kashum megaleach me'achshav miskaleach al Nazirus. When you have a Nazir bekever, when he's shaving, it has to do with Nazirus. Avol Nazir Mitzorah, but when you have a Nazir who's a Mitzorah, miskaleach tchila, when he's shaving at first, miskaleach al shenisarape mitzaratu. That's a shaving because he was healed from the tzaras. And so therefore, here's the argument the Brisa is making. V'hachi katani, this is what the Brisa is saying. Yemei chiluto she'en roi l'teglachas tumah de Nazir ela l'teglachas de tzaras. By a confirmed Mitzorah, the shaving is not like the shaving of a tumah of a Nazir, it's a shaving for tzaras. Lo kol shekein she'en olin min minyan. So certainly the days of Mitzorah should not count in terms of the number of days the Nazirus to Tahara, in terms of the number of days of the counting of the Nazirus. And it could very well be that if a person declares himself a Nazir in a Beis HaKvaros, he would require the Giluach of Tumah. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Brisa. B'timei Rosh Nizro, the Pasuk talks about a Nazir who becomes Tameh. B'tahar shenitma hakasa medaber. The Brisa says the Pasuk is specifically referring to a Nazir Tahar who becomes Tameh. Shuton havar asar v'havar as-siparin. He needs to shave his hair and he needs to bring the bird offerings. V'liftor es ha-Nazir bekever. The Brisa says explicitly, by a Nazir bekever, a person who declares himself a Nazir in a cemetery, he's pater. She'ein ton havar asar. He doesn't need to remove his hair. And he doesn't need to bring the bird offerings. And it is a kal v'chomer. If somebody who was tar and became tamei requires shaving of the hair and bringing the bird offerings, Eino din sheyeton havar asar v'havar siporin. Somebody who is tummy from the outside of the Nazirus, maybe you would think certainly he needs to remove his hair and he needs to bring the bird offerings. Talmud Lomer v'timei rosh nizro. That's what the pasuk says. V'timei rosh nizro b'misha yatar v'nitma hakasu medaber. The pasuk is specifically talking about someone who was tar and became tummy. Sheyeton havar asar v'havar siporin. He needs to remove his hair. He needs to bring the bird offerings. V'liftor as hanazir bekevrin. We pater a person who became a nazir while he was in a cemetery. He does not have to shave. There is no teglachas tumah, and the Gemara says shma mina. Indeed, we do see from this brisa that there's no teglachas of tumah in that case. And the Gemara continues, Man Tana Ha Tanu Rabbanan, who is the author of the following brisa? This is the brisa we quoted above. Ein bein tameh shenazir lenazir tar shenitma. There's no difference between a person who became a nazir when he was tameh, meaning while he was in a cemetery, and a nazir who was tar and became tameh. There's no difference between those two, except for the following: Ela shetameh shenazar shvi shelo ola lo min haminyan. When you have a person who becomes a nazir in a cemetery, so on the seventh day when he purifies himself, that day already counts towards the nazirus. That is the beginning of his nazirus. The nazir tar shenitma. But if you have a nazir who was pure who becomes tameh and has to purify himself, ein shvi shelo ola lo min haminyan. That seventh day doesn't count towards the nazirus because he has to bring karbanos on the eighth day. So in that situation, the nazirus starts one day later. So who's the author of this brisa? Amar Rav Chisda says Rebbe. The author of the brisa is Rebbe. The Amar Rebbe ein nazirus tahara chala ela ad shmini, because it's Rebbe who says that in the case of a nazir tar who becomes tameh, so the new nazirus doesn't start until the eighth day, which is exactly what the brisa is saying. The Tamer of Yosef Rabbi Yehudi, because if you said it was Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, ha'amar nazirus to tahara mishvi hu dechayla. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda holds that the nazirus of tahara actually starts from the seventh day, even by a nazir tahar who becomes tameh, and he has to bring karbanos. But the actual nazirus starts before he brings the karban. It starts before he brings the karbanos. It starts on the seventh day. And the Gemara says, "My Rebbe, my Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda." Where do we find this machlokas Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda? The Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa, v'kidesh es rosho by Yom Hahu. It says on that day, so he's going to become a nazir again and start over his nazirus. And what day are we talking about? B'Yom Havos karbanos of divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says it's the day he brings the karbanos, what we refer to as the eighth day. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says B'Yom Tegalachto. It's the day that he shaves, meaning to say the seventh day. That's the machlokas Tanoim. And the Gemara continues, V'hadetzanan, and that which we learned in the Mishnah in Krisos, Nazir shenitma tumas harbe. Let's say you have a Nazir who becomes tameh consecutively several times. Eino mevi ela karban echad. He only brings one set of karbanos for the tumah. Man tana, so who is the Tana of this Mishnah? Amar Rav Chisda says, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehudi. The Tana of this Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar Nazirus Tahara Mishvi Chayla. Because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that the Nazirus of purity, it actually starts from the seventh day. As we said, on the seventh day when the Nazir becomes pure, that's when he starts the new count of the Nazirus. He doesn't need to wait until the eighth day. And so then you can understand why, if he has consecutive tumas, he would only bring one set of karbanos. As the Gemara explains, Umashkachasla, Kagon Shenitma Bishvi, what we can have a case is that he becomes tameh on the seventh day. B'chazar v'nitma b'shvi, he keeps becoming tameh on the seventh day. In other words, he goes through the purification process, and then on the seventh day, before it's even the day where he's ready to bring his karbanos, at that point in time, he becomes tameh again. He never even reaches the moment where he could have brought a karban. So in that case, we say he brings one set of karbanos. The idea is, Kavan de lo yatsa shah haruya lahavi karban, since there wasn't even a moment where he could have brought the karban, so eino chayiv el karban echad, so he's only chayiv one set of karbanos. That will all work according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, who says that on the seventh day, that's when he can begin counting the new Nazirus. The Itema Rebbe, now if you're going to say it's Rebbe, so then we can't understand this Mishnah, because Eden nitma b'shvi v'chazar v'nitma b'shvi, if he became tameh on the seventh day, and again he kept becoming tameh on the seventh day, so kulu tuma arichtehi, so that's really all one long tuma, because again, according to Rebbe, you really don't start the new Nazirus anyway until the eighth day when you bring the karbanos. You haven't brought the karbanos yet, you're still on the seventh day. So that's all going to be one long tuma anyway. V'ida nitma b'shmini v'chazar v'nitma b'shmini, and if you're going to say we're working within Rebbe, and we're talking where he becomes tameh on the eighth day, and he keeps becoming tameh on the eighth day, when already it was a time when he could have brought the set of karbanos, so harei yatzta shah hasharuya lahavi karban, now you already have a time where he was able to bring the karbanos, and if you've reached that time where he was able to bring the set of karbanos for purifying himself from this tumah, so then he would have to bring another karban for each time that he becomes tameh. It wouldn't be good just to bring one set of karbanos. And so that's why the Gemara says that Mishnah in Krisos follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues, my time of the Rebbe, what is the reason of Rebbe? Why does Rebbe say that it's on the 8th day that the Nazir begins to count his new Nazirus? Amar Kra, so he says, because the Pasuk says, V'chiper olav me'asher chata ala nefesh, that Pasuk of V'chiper olav is talking about the bringing of the Karbanos. V'hadar v'kiddush es rosho, and then the Pasuk talks about he sanctifies himself, he begins the Nazirus. So you see it's after the Karban on the 8th day when he begins the new Nazirus. For Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, and what does Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda respond? Im Kain, if that was the case, Lema Kra v'kiddush es rosho, the Pasuk could have just said v'kiddush es rosho and stopped there, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis.